Hi, everybody, and welcome to this third interview with philosopher and physicist Joe Provenzano. My name is Dave Palmer, and on this YouTube channel, we've just been talking about topics related to philosophy. I hope you're enjoying it. Please like the videos and ask questions. The guests that I'm having on are watching these videos, so they'll answer any questions you have. And Joe is the author of a book called Conscious Energy and the Evolution of Philosophy. And in the first edition of the book, he spends the first half talking about the history of philosophy, the evolution of philosophy. And I found it so fascinating that I asked him to be my first guest, and we had two great conversations. And so we are back now to talk more specifically about conscious energy and what this is all about. He calls it St. Thomas Aquinas plus time. And so, Joe Provenzano, welcome back. How you doing?
Fine. I'm happy to be here. And I guess last time we talked about philosophy in general and then some of the different philosophers. And today we want to talk about the philosophy of conscious energy itself, which is a new philosophy. That's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. So when we say philosophy, what do we mean? What's philosophy? Let's get started with that. We talked a little bit of that last time, but very briefly.
When I think of philosophy, I think of the what's most fundamental about the universe. What can we say about it that really describes it, and then we can derive other things from that. What's going on?
Yeah.
You could say what's driving evolution, or what's it all about? That's what I call the first big question. And what is the nature of reality? And the second question is, how should we live our lives in order to gain lasting happiness? And I see those two as connected. The earlier philosophers before scientific times saw them as connected. Recently, now that we know about evolution and the Big Bang and all that, unfortunately, the philosophers of today have quit asking those questions because they think we can't get answers.
Really? So they've kind of thrown in to say, I just would they go so far as to say we really can't figure out what the world's about, and therefore we don't know how we can act, and is that why we get relativism and people just thinking, hey, just kind of do whatever feels good? Or?
It goes in all directions.
Yeah.
It goes in all directions like that. Some say there are no answers. They don't exist. Some say they exist. We can't find them. But they have no anchor to say this is the way it is, and therefore this is how we should act. And the philosophy of conscious energy does that. What's unique about it is, as opposed to the earlier philosophers, is that it's based on the findings of modern science.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's the key.
Now, conscious energy, two words. Consciousness itself, I understand, at least in my mind, to be an awareness that one has of the surrounding world, perhaps of oneself as well. Would that be a good working definition of consciousness?
It is, but we got to be careful. We can't really define it. It's an internal feeling that we have. I think of it as that special an awareness that of consciousness in general is an awareness of the body and the body's relation to the environment. And rocks don't have that. You drop a rock and it breaks, you don't feel any compassion. You drop an animal and it falls and hits the ground and suffers and dies, you know what that animal is going through, and you feel that. That awareness of the body and the body's relation to the environment is consciousness. Then you can take it one step further. Like I visualize that as a field of energy in the brain that's aware of the body, and that field is aware of the environment. Then you can take it one step further, and that conscious field can become aware of itself. Self-conscious energy. That's what's really the important
That's
thing.
what it is. Now, can I interrupt for a second? Because you talked about the rock and the dog and dropping, and whether they feel we feel anything. That's from our perspective. The rock doesn't have any consciousness itself, right? Because there's no mind, there's no awareness. A plant, does it have consciousness? Not from our perspective, from its perspective. Does it have any consciousness?
A lower form. I mean, you can put a plant and watch it turn or sit there a couple of days, and it'll turn to the sun.
Yeah.
It'll turn to the light. It has some awareness of itself and the environment. It's just at a lower level.
Very low level.
Even at the lowest level of molecules, they attract each other. There's not a hard line.
Yeah.
It's just that when you reach a certain level, you get that special awareness of the body and the body's relation to the environment that I would call that conscious
yeah.
field. But there's a field there all along.
Yeah, I find it there's a spectrum.
There's a spectrum.
Clearly we got a rock, a plant, a dog, and a human being. And the dog wakes up in the morning, and I've never been a dog, so I don't know what dogs think. But there certainly is. I'm hungry. I want to go meet. Again, even saying that, I don't think they think that. They just do it, right? And so I'm still trying to get this kind of spectrum and of consciousness in the creatures that we experience in the world. Can you explain that a little bit better and how it differs?
Well, physics has discovered at least two levels of energy at the lowest level. There's radiation. There's no matter there, but no mass. Radiation, light, it moves. Then there's molecules and matter and form. And those two are related. They're both energy, but they're very different. They're different states of energy. E equals mc squared. Einstein showed us that an electron can lose energy and drop from a higher energy state to a lower energy state. It emits a photon. So, but those are very different. And they certainly react with their environment. You have to say there's some kind of a, quote, awareness of the environment. But it's not like the living creature. The living creature is the one that feels pain, feels sorrow, feels empathy. I see that as not the sum of the parts. Some people call it a soul. I see it as another form, another state of energy, transformed to be aware of the body and the body's relation to the environment. That would be the third state of energy. That's where the philosophy of conscious energy says there's three states, but actually it says there's four states, and that fourth one is that awareness is not only aware of the body and the environment, but of itself. Mm-hmm. That sets the stage to say that it could exist apart from the body.
Yeah,
whereas the others purely conscious could not.
I see a lot of parallels with Aquinas here, the different types of souls. I know you said you don't necessarily use soul terminology so much, so in this pen here, is there energy here? There's energy in the molecules and the physical energy. And how does that energy manifest itself in a pen? What?
It's transformed into matter, molecules. If radiation is energy whose nature is to move fast, it's congealed energy would be what you call matter. The energy somehow gets trapped into particles and things, but that allows the increasing complexity. You go from the very Big Bang, which is not physical at all. The Big Bang is even the laws of physics weren't formed. It's real, but it's non-physical energy. Mm-hmm. It evolves. It's unstable. It evolves and becomes more. Parts of it become more and more physical, but complex structures. And the complexity. This is Teilhard's insight. This increasing complexity. It's not just complex to be complex. It leads to a unity. It folds in on itself. It forms another state. Eventually, you get a soul, which is what I think the conscious energy field is. The soul.
So there's an evolution leading up to a soul,
but there's state changes. That's the key.
Okay.
It looks smooth, but there are clear breaks.
Yeah.
That's why I call it Thomas with time, because all the things Thomas says exist, they come about not bingo at once like they viewed then, but over time.
Yeah. So that's where I need a little bit more clarification, because from my understanding, a dog is conceived in its mother's womb, and it has the dog's soul, and a dog has a soul, a sensitive soul. A plant has a soul. A human being has a rational soul. Angels don't have souls; they're pure spirit. We'll talk about angels later, but the evolution leading to a soul, I don't quite get that. Well, how to explain that?
Imagine energy transforming. Some of the radiation transforms into matter. Some of the matter forms and gets complex and has fields and complex fields and relationships. And during that process, eventually at some point, there's a state change. Like water freezes. When it freezes, a new ball game.
Yeah.
Well, once that human being forms, that conscious energy field forms, you've got a soul. Bingo. That's a new state change. You can think God infused it, or God made it happen, or you don't even think of God. But that's the philosophy of conscious energy.
But if it's not God, what is it?
Well, you don't know.
So it's got to be something intelligent, right? Does it need to be something intelligent to do this?
Well, you're getting into religion, not philosophy. Philosophy says the philosophy just tries to describe what's going on without God. It's consistent with, and it may conclude that there's a God.
Right.
But you're trying to do it just based on what we see. What we see is this evolution and these state changes. That's what we see. And that's what conscious energy is all about, is that the soul is a state of energy.
Okay. Is the soul the apex of this evolutionary process? Is there anything that a soul can do to improve and have a higher state of consciousness, or is the rational soul the highest?
You know, I've thought about that a lot. I don't think so. I think a soul is a soul. You're either self-conscious or you're not. What happens then, though, is the souls begin to form together and get relationships. Just like the molecule, you get a hydrogen molecule, it's the same as it was 100 billion years ago. But when you get enough of them put together a certain way, bingo, a human being is all of a sudden there.
Mm-hmm.
But then that human being is still a human being. Now what we need to do is get the human beings working together.
Yeah.
Still recognizing individual, kind of sounds like the U.S. Constitution. We have individual rights and freedoms, but we're going to get together to form a union. And that's what we need to do.
Okay. Teilhard de Chardin is your go-to philosopher, and he's the one that kind of, did he originate this type of conscious energy philosophy? Did he perfect it? Or what's the evolution of this philosophy, I guess?
Teilhard's a character, okay? And he was a Jesuit priest. He was a philosopher. He probably turned over his grave if he heard me calling him a philosopher, because he really didn't think of himself as he was a priest. He was a mystic. He was a scientist, and he blended all those things together. The three of them. He didn't make any distinctions. He didn't. Today I'm doing pure philosophy, like Thomas did. He kept his disciplines distinct, and he was very good about that. Teilhard wasn't like that. He was just. He gave you his opinion, and it was he drove his mysticism drove the scientists crazy, and his science drove a lot of the religious people crazy.
Uh-huh.
And so but he just mixed it all together.
He didn't fit into a box.
No,
so
he
to
didn't
speak.
fit into a box.
Who would he have? I think you told me previously he died in 1955. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or so this is a very modern philosopher.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Who would he say were his greatest influences? I know he didn't want to be a philosopher, but
I don't even think he talked about philosophers.
Really?
He was a priest. He saw this vision, and he gave it to us.
And he's a believer, clearly.
He was a Jesuit priest and a believer, and I have picked out some of the things of his and tried to make them into a pure philosophy, which he didn't do.
Okay.
He had something called the within, and he never really clearly defined it. I think it relates to the form and the essence of Thomas, but his within evolved over time, but it still had distinct levels.
Mm-hmm.
The human within. I've called that I've tried to take his ideas and make them clear in a pure philosophy. That's what the philosophy of conscious energy is.
Would anybody, or has anybody accused him of being New Agey?
He's been accused of everything.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
But I don't think that's fair.
Okay.
But
Let me bring up a couple of famous philosophers and tell me how this kind of evolution of conscious energy that Chardin would propose, Hegelianism, the dialectic, my basic knowledge of that is that Hegel believed, even in a spiritual sense, that we were evolving towards some final end, and the history of the world is an evolution, even on a spiritual realm.
We could do this with Hegel. We could do it with all the philosophers, because they all pick some aspect of consciousness. With Hegel, there's a force that's driving it, and we're not important. We're just tools. The state is what's important.
Mm-hmm.
That's not Teilhard's vision at all. He saw
it's almost the opposite, right?
It is. It's related, but Teilhard saw the increasing consciousness and complexity happening. So to him, the individual humans were it's like the fruit of the effort. When we got to the individual self-consciousness, there's where your knowledge is. That's where love comes from. That's what's important.
Yeah.
And some people have argued we can't be important because we're so rare in the universe. That's like saying, well, diamonds aren't important because they're rare. No, they're important because they are rare.
Yeah.
But we're not important because we're rare. We're important because we have self-consciousness. And when you view the world as a striving to increase consciousness and complexity, you begin to see the value, and you can develop a moral code based on that. Obviously, killing people is not increasing consciousness.
Yeah.
So you can define good and evil at the level of an act is good if it increases consciousness.
Let me ask you this. Clearly, Chardin, and you would agree that I have greater consciousness than this pen and a plant and a dog because I'm a human being. Would one person, A, be able to have more consciousness than another human being? And also, can one's consciousness evolve during their life? Certainly, a 3-year-old has less consciousness than a 40-year-old, right? Would that be true?
I don't know about a 3 and a 4-year-old, but in terms of individuals, some people are smarter than other people. That's not a different level of consciousness.
Okay.
Consciousness is all people have awareness of their own existence. They're all self-conscious creatures. In that sense, we're all equal. Some are smarter than others. Some can run faster. Some can jump higher. Some can't run at all or think about certain things. Some are good in math. But those are not differences in consciousness. Those are differences in smartness. To me, consciousness is that awareness of our self-awareness. If you've got that, you've got it. The next level is not smarter. Sure, we're going to get smarter, but that's not really a new level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
The next level is people working together.
Okay. There's a unity aspect.
And think of it as
Yeah. Okay. So, just bringing in some modern day, moral dilemmas. Somebody would say somebody who's in a deep coma. Some people would argue they've lost their personhood. They can't think. We should go ahead and pull the plug. I think in Christian beliefs, we say this is still has the dignity of a human person, right? How would Chardin say about that? Does that person still have consciousness if they can't be self-reflective?
The question is there a self-conscious energy field present in that body?
Yeah.
Or is that body or is the conscious? We really can't it's hard to know that because we can't detect it. It's not really physical.
Yeah.
But at least there's a principle involved here. That's why, like in the Catholic Church, at some point you can pull the plug.
Yeah, right.
And I would say the philosophy of conscious energy is what they're arguing there is if it's reasonable to assume that field is gone and that it can't come back, then keeping the body alive isn't necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is the second big question, how am I to live? How do I respond to this world that I'm living in? What's the moral code? What are the implications on the way one lives?
That's one of the good things about this philosophy is it does give a basis. It's very hard without religion to have a basis for moral action or a purpose. This philosophy says increasing consciousness is what the universe is all about. Self-conscious creatures are the highest form of that. So we're the highest achievement of the universe so far. Then you can start to make arguments. Well, then you shouldn't be killing people. Mm-hmm. Sounds silly to make that argument, but philosophically, the existentialists can't make that argument.
Yeah.
Nietzsche doesn't say you can't kill people.
Right,
they think you can. Power makes right.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of this philosophy. It kind of gives a common sense. It agrees with common sense and it agrees with what the religion says, but it's just based on science. That's the key. That's what's different about it.
Mm-hmm. So I don't kill somebody because that decreases consciousness, because that was a conscious being, right? Is there any answer to the fact that if somebody dies, they still exist, the separation of their body, in Christian philosophy, if I die right now, I'm still alive. I have a separated soul, and would I still have energy there in Chardin's view, even though I died, or is it over?
Well, no, it's not over. That's the beauty of the self-conscious energy field. The field in an animal is aware of the body and the body's relation to the environment. So if the body dies, there's nothing left for that field to do. Mm-hmm. But in the human being, and maybe some animals, I don't know, but at least in human beings, that field is aware of itself. So in principle, when the body dies, the field could still be existing apart from the body because it has the property that it's aware of itself. That's the self-conscious energy that's consistent with the soul, just based on philosophy. It's consistent with what we know from religious doctrine and Thomas Aquinas, but it's derived from scientific approach. That's what's different about this philosophy.
Yeah. Now, you had told me previously that Chardin did not have a place for angels in his philosophy. I know he didn't like to be a philosopher. Well, what's the problem with angels?
See, I'm not completely a Teilhardian. I like him. I take some of his ideas, but I really like a lot Thomas as well. So this philosophy is kind of a Thomas and Teilhard together. In fact, that should be it. Maybe you and I can work on that someday. But that's really, it's not just Teilhard would say this. It's what the philosophy says once you put it together. So I'm sorry, what was your question again?
Yeah, just angels.
Oh, angels.
Yeah, angels.
Well, see, with Teilhard, what we look at this evolutionary process, it is God's creative process. This is, God just goes, and then you got the Big Bang, and then that's all there is, and he works with it. He's trying to produce consciousness. This is the way he creates. So out of that comes souls, which are kind of like angels, but they don't get created directly. So that's where I part with that. Never made sense to me in Teilhard. And I believe that God is spirit and God creates spirit. That's where the other book we talked about comes to bear, the fallen angel model. That's what really ties everything together.
Yeah.
It's beyond philosophy. We don't want to get too much.
That's our next
today.
Interview.
We'll get into that. But that way, God creates angels. The angels sinned. That some of that lost energy, since it's all energy, spiritual energy, they lost spiritual gifts. That energy starts to devolve. God works with it, and he becomes the reason for the increasing consciousness and complexity. God is trying to pull forth consciousness from that lost energy.
Yeah. Okay, so in Christian philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas, kind of the gold standard of Catholicism, my goal as a human being is to one day unite with God in beatitude, and I'm going to be united to my creator, and my mind will become angelic, and I'm in heaven, and I get my body back, and there's a resurrection of the body, and yay, I'm in heaven. What's the end goal for the individual human being? You talk about the unity of the people and all that with Chardin. For the individual person, what's the end game?
And from the philosophy of conscious energy point of view, or my own personal view?
Either, any way you want to take it.
From the philosophy of conscious energy point of view, the only way you're going to achieve lasting happiness is when you align with what. If the universe went through 13 billion years to produce you, seems like you've got some feeling, some direction you need to. So when you choose to continue that path, you will get your lasting happiness. And you realize that you have an awareness of yourself as existing, so you would have naturally a hope that your consciousness could survive. Mm-hmm. So then you start looking around, well, how can that be? And then you get outside of philosophy, and you find that religion is consistent with that. So I think the philosophy can lead you to religion in that way.
Yeah. So if I'm and you and all the other human beings are really kind of the result of millions of years of evolution, from this standpoint, how do we explain that there's still rocks and dogs and butterflies? Did they just not evolve quite so well, or how does that work out?
That's one of the great mysteries. Okay.
Yeah.
It's an arduous, long, ugly, in some sense, process.
Yeah.
And yet, out of it is coming consciousness.
Yeah.
It's inefficient if you look at it that way, because there's so much energy and such little. Maybe there's another place like Earth, probably, but not many. When you look at all the stars, you have to say it's inefficient.
Yeah.
That's where the fallen angel model makes sense. If this is God's creative process, it was pretty inefficient.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if God is trying to pull what he can out of a fall, it starts to make sense. Yeah. God is saving as much of the consciousness as he can squeeze out of it. I think what's going to happen in the end is there will be a heat death of the universe. It'll all reach the same temperature, and so there's no more activity. But all the souls that will have come out and gone to heaven. That's the beauty of it.
Could one read sacred scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, and come out of it and say, you know what, this theory is right. Chardin was right. Conscious energy is right. Are there any conflicts with Scripture, or would they be compatible?
Well, you have to read Scripture as written before science. If you want to say 7 literal days, of course, that doesn't make sense because there wasn't a day until there was the earth to revolve around the sun. So if you read the intent of Scripture, as Galileo said, science is about how the heavens go. Scripture is about how to go to heaven. And
I like
so
that.
if you read Scripture that way, and as this is God speaking to people at the time the best way he can to get them to rise above the selfishness of nature. Let's face it, we come out of nature with some very selfish physical drives. We want power. We want to, so we want to do things like that. And so he's saying, love your neighbor. Don't be selfish. The method is kind of contrary to what a lot of we get from the evolution. And so that, to me, explains how you put them together. That's the purpose of the Scripture, is to get us out of that mode.
Now, is there, maybe a dumb question, but is there kind of a quantifiable level of conscious energy that we may not be aware of? But let's say you have 100 people in a room and they're all getting along swimmingly and everything's great, and then all of a sudden a fight breaks out and people start beating each other and God forbid somebody dies. Did the level of consciousness can it rise and fall in a microcosm like that?
Well, sure. If people die, I mean,
so quantifiably, you can say, wow, we just had a lowering of conscious energy right there. I mean, does that make sense?
Sure, it does.
Okay.
There's the second law of thermodynamics says everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And but remember, they can't fall apart till they come together.
Yeah.
Something's primary, something's secondary. Spencer was similar to Teilhard, Herbert Spencer. But he had an increasing consciousness and then a decreasing. So he ended up in great despair because there was no direction.
Mm-hmm. And
of course, Bertrand Russell and some of the others, they just see us as devolving.
Uh-huh.
So this is the downward trend. All of those are pessimistic. It's the increasing consciousness is where you get the optimism.
Yeah, an atheist could embrace this philosophy as much as a believer could.
An atheist could look at this philosophy, and he could say, "Well, okay, I see that. I'll buy that. That's what's most important. I'll buy that I should align with it, but I don't believe the soul really survives death.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe self-conscious, but I think I don't think there's a God, and I think so. The answer is yes. But he wouldn't carry some of the beliefs that are consistent with religion, but he could still follow this. And then we could talk about issues on a common basis that we can't do otherwise.
Yeah. Is the belief in the existence of the soul or energy or whatever you want to call it beyond death, is that inherent in this philosophy, or could one say that when one dies, it's all over?
One could say that. It doesn't. Philosophy of consciousness, it doesn't prove that. I don't think it doesn't prove anything. It's a framework, and you got to kind of put your own spin on it. But the framework says the potential is there, and you can believe that it survives or not.
Yeah.
And still buy the philosophy.
You talk about unity, people coming together, kind of like a brotherhood of man, almost kind of thing. What is that? Something, is that the goal of this philosophy? Is to bring all people together, even in a worldly sense or in a supernatural sense, or what? How do people come together in this theory?
Think of the molecules. Once you get a hydrogen molecule, it's the same thing as it was 100 billion years ago. It's the same now, but they combine in different ways and produce things, and so ultimately it's produced people.
Yeah.
So the question is, people combining and working together and helping each other. If somebody develops a vaccine, it can save a lot of people. It's a wonderful thing. The internet can be one, but there's always evils that come in as the consciousness and the coordination goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So Teilhard saw some kind of visions I never saw about how they could come together in the second coming of Christ. What I see it is love God, love your neighbor, live your life to where you're bringing things together. You die, you go to heaven. And God's trying to save as many souls as possible.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah. And that sounds very Christian. And so that's kind of the Christian message. Darwin. It's kind of hard to talk about any kind of evolution without thinking of Darwin, the origin of species, the descent of man, more of a physical type of how would he compare it to
he
this?
He saw the survival of the fittest, and that's true to a large extent. His gradual, a lot of his theory about how things gradually change, don't work, because we got, there are jumps that can't be explained by that. Yeah. But the basic idea that we evolve and that the strongest ones survive, there's a lot of truth to it. But it's one aspect. There's also the compassion. He tried to argue that you would be compassionate and all, but it really doesn't fit with his philosophy. Some philosophers aren't consistent.
Yeah,
they'll go so far, then they'll give you a conclusion that doesn't really follow, and that's not good. But I would see survival of the fittest is an aspect that needs an increasing consciousness. You need that, or you wouldn't continue. Free will enters at some point, and it's important. But if you make it too important, you get existentialism. So you can't take any aspect of consciousness and make it too important, or you get this philosophy tree that we've talked about.
Yeah.
But the increasing consciousness itself, if you keep that as the driving force and align to that, that's the philosophy of consciousness.
Yeah. I have studied philosophy kind of self-taught for many years, mostly Aquinas. I really wasn't familiar with Chardin until I met you. And I think most people, if you said, have you ever heard of Descartes or Nietzsche or Hegel perhaps, or certainly Freud? Oh, yeah, I've at least heard of them. They may not know anything what they taught, but do you feel like is one of your goals is to get this conscious energy philosophy better known? Do more people need to be aware of this, or what is your goal? Especially because you're rewriting your book, right? A new edition's coming out.
Yes, it is. Teilhard was not really a philosopher. He was a Jesuit priest, a paleontologist, and a scientist, and a mystic, and he mixed all those together. And he didn't really produce what you'd call a philosophy. I took some of his ideas, the key ones: change of state, evolution, and increasing consciousness and complexity, and added that to this notion of consciousness that I have, and put it together into the philosophy of conscious energy. You don't need to know a lot about Teilhard de Chardin to follow this philosophy, but it helps to see the background. And that's why the history of philosophy, I think, has these different aspects of consciousness. But he was a mystic, and he not really considered himself to be a philosopher. He didn't do that.
Aristotle said that all people seek happiness. That's kind of the one common denominator. Aquinas agreed. He gave happiness a name, basically God. God is our beatitude. It's our goal. It's what everything is moving towards. Every desire has some participation in our desire for God. Would that be similar? Are higher levels of consciousness, does it equate to higher degrees of happiness? So is a more conscious person a happier person?
No. What's happiness is when you align yourself with the truth, and you act in a certain way. You're conscious whether you're happy or not. But if you align that the second question follows from the first. If increasing consciousness is what's most fundamental in the universe, and it produced me, I can choose to move along that direction, or I can choose to be selfish and not care about others and work together. And the philosophy of conscious energy is a basis for arguing what we commonsensically think of, but on a philosophical basis.
All right. Well, you're the Chardin guy. I'm the Aquinas guy. If they've both been passed away, for a while, especially Aquinas. If those two get together in a bar and have an hour to talk to each other over a beer, it seems like you're saying they probably would be, and they're looking at it from a 21st century standpoint.
It's more accurate to call me a half Thomas than a half Teilhard. Okay, because there's things about Teilhard I don't like,
Okay.
He didn't talk about angels. I think we mentioned that earlier. And I think the angels need to be worked into this, which is the other book. Thomas was missing evolution and change of state because they didn't know about it then. I think all of his ideas can be preserved but created over time.
Mm-hmm.
But Teilhard's missing angels, and I don't think that makes sense because God is spirit. To me, God creates angels. That's why our fallen angel model, which God creates angels, gave them gifts of spiritual energy. They lost it. It became unraveling, and then God works with that. And then as God is working with that disordered spiritual energy, it evolves. He's pulling on it. His pull is the law of increasing consciousness and complexity. You can't see that philosophically, but it fits with our faith. So the fallen angel model, Teilhard and Thomas, I think we can put all that together. You and I should work on that.
That'll be our next project.
That'll be our next
All right. Well, that brings us to an end. I want to give you the last word. If there's anything else that you want to say to the audience about the new edition of the book coming out, I know you say don't get the old one, but I appreciate the conversation. It's very interesting, and I would like to work with you on this project. But what should people know about the book?
It's a pure philosophy book. It's got a lot of history in it. I tried to use increasing consciousness to explain how all these other philosophers make sense when they're all over the map. I think they're all over the map because they didn't pick quite the right starting point. So it's explained that way. I'm available if people want to reach me. There's many ways to reach me, and Joe Pro at proandsons.com is my email address, and I would welcome any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I also want to thank your wife, Linda, because she's doing what my daughter typically does, is kind of run the board and push all the buttons. And so I really appreciate her being here with us today as well. Thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. And a couple things. If you know of somebody that should sit down and talk to me about philosophy, or maybe it's you, well, get in touch with me. You can do it here on the YouTube channel. And also, be sure to comment and ask questions. I know Joe will be watching this video, and he'll be paying attention to it, and he can answer directly. But let's keep the conversation going. We need to talk more philosophy and not less. So that's going to do it for this interview with Joe Provenzano. Again, his book is called Conscious Energy and the Evolution of Philosophy. Don't get it yet because he's putting out a new edition very soon. Wait for that to come out. It'll be even better than the first one. Thank you, and God bless you.